And it's my great pleasure to be here today chairing this conversation with Shahidul, who has been a friend of the photography department at Sunderland for some 25 plus years. And we've had a long-term links with Bashala and Rick, including collaborations, photographic exchanges, and all sorts of things that we also have planned for the future. So our talk today is called Speaking Truth to Power, because that has always been your strength, Shahidul, as a photographer and a journalist. And of course, as Amanda mentioned, many of the audience will be aware of your shocking arrest and imprisonment in 2018 and the global outcry that was created. But we will come back to the laws that led to that. But I want to start, if I may, asking you a bit about your background. Can you talk us a bit about how you got to photography? Because that's not where you started. I think you studied the sciences. So why photography, Shahidul?
Well, the sciences wasn't really part of any plan as such. I think it was more what's considered a respectable career. I come from a middle-class home, and you become a doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer, or something like that. In a sense, my going into life sciences, which is where I have an interest, gave that option. But it's really, while in London University, I got very involved with the Socialist Workers' Party and began to see how they used photography as part of their activism, as part of their campaigns. And I recognized the power of this medium. I didn't know at that time that I certainly could or would become a professional photographer, but I gave it a go. I mean, getting a camera was a little bit of an accident, but I don't think I'll dwell on that as such. I mean, perhaps later on, if we have the chance, we might go into it. But my initial challenge was to know if I could actually make a living, because at the end of the day, that was a reality test that had to be gone through. So I joined a camera club and began to take pictures. But the picture that you see on the screen right now slightly predates that, because I've never had formal training in photography. So it was, amateur photography, books on photography. One joy about being Britain at that time was the libraries that you have. You really have excellent libraries all across. I'm not sure what number it is, but I think it's 760 or 780, something like that, which is the photography section in the library. I would just go straight to that section, I think you were allowed 8 books at a time. I would take all 8, and I would go to another library and get another 8. And I just devoured these books. I didn't really understand them so well, but that was my education. It was amateur photography. It was all those other things. But the thing was, to a large extent, these books and the magazines talked about shutter speed and f-stops, and aesthetics and rules of thirds. And that's basically what I was doing. So this picture is taken in infrared. It's early on. And I was, one of the advantages, I suppose, of being a scientist is you can play around with things. I was very comfortable in the darkroom, mixing chemicals, trying to do things. And I had an interest in the process. So this was taken in Kew Garden. But for me, what was interesting was, because it's shot in Kodak infrared, the film is also sensitive to visible light. So you have to put an opaque filter onto the lens in order to be able to see only in infrared light. And what that means essentially is you're shooting blind, because you can't see the DSLR. Once you put an opaque filter, it doesn't allow you to see. So the framing, at least, is done by approximation. More interestingly, what you see is not what you get. So you have to pre-visualize, and you have to see the way the film sees. And that I found very, very interesting because uh, I think that is profoundly something that photography requires you to do, not merely in a mechanical sense in terms of shades, but what the image will hold is something that you need to pre-visualize. And that relates to relationships, that relates obviously to technical issues of color and light and whatever. But you need to be able to enter that space. And I found that a very interesting exercise. But while I was doing this, I joined a camera club. They were technically very good. This became part of a portfolio they presented, and it won me the best. I became the best photographer of the year from in the Arts Council. So that was kind of nice. I started photography relatively recently, and being recognized is always nice. And I thought, okay, let me give it a shot. And I joined a camera club, a photographic studio called the Young Rascals. And essentially, I would take pictures of kids. Now, that's where the real lesson began, because, while schools teach you shutter speed and f-stops, they don't teach you so much about interpersonal relationships. And that's what I was doing. I was meeting up with strangers, going to their homes, convincing them about taking pictures. Those were the days you could go as a stranger to people's homes. And one of the things I realized that, regardless of what the books tell you, as far as parents are concerned, the finest photograph in the world is a happy picture of your kid. And I took those and I sold those images. But something else happened as a follow-up, which for me, I think now holds me in good stead, because I was not happy about the type of pictures I was taking. It wasn't the photography I dreamt about. But they were telling me, what are you talking about? You're a star photographer. You make more money than anyone else. This is 1983, and it was taking me home £350 a week, which is a lot of money in those days. It's a lot of money now. But the point was that while I was waiting for this, I was being treated as a star photographer. I was earning good money. I thought, this is dangerous. Pretty soon I'm in the zone of comfort. The money's good. Everyone says nice things. And at some point, I'll start believing I'm a good photographer. And that was a trap I needed to get away from. So I decided to make a clean break. I had that savings I had up till that point, which was going to set up my new photography business back home. But when I came home, firstly, no one knew me. I didn't have a track record. I didn't have the credentials. I wanted to be a photojournalist, a documentary photographer. I had nothing to back me up. And the money that I had went into repaying my dad's house building loan debts. He built a house taking a loan, and I mean, I have no regrets. It was money well spent. But so I didn't have money. I didn't have a job. And I began doing what I did. I mean, I was technically skilled. So I managed to convince some business people. We set up a company. I did product photography, fashion, all sorts of things, anything that could pay. And now that we come to this picture, this is 1987. I started in 84, and there was this period when I was doing commercial work. But I'd left an independent nation. I'd left shortly after our liberation. I came back to a country which is being run by an autocrat, a military dictator. So I got involved in the movement in the streets. This picture is of a young man called Nur Hussain. On his back, it says, "Let democracy be freed." And he became our symbol of resistance. He was killed on the 10th of November, 1987. And this is a mural drawn on university campus where my partner, Renema, was the chairperson of the anthropology department. But interestingly, along with the mural, the graffiti is by different political parties. that's something that today does not exist. I mean, today, the political dominance is so absolute that if a particular party is the ruling party, no other student body will have a chance of getting a look in. But this was a photograph taken then, and I continued that work, which later became my work. This picture is also taken during that Ashad period. It's at Shahid Minar, which is our martyrs memorial. And this woman who's in London now, and we're still in touch actually, Shama Azad. So it was a protest against violence against women. So a lot of my work was about those protests, about the civil society movements and things like that. And that's where I've continued. Luckily for me, today, I don't do a lot of commercial photography. I do very little. I can get away with doing work that I want to do. And all the work pretty much that I do is about social justice. So the work that you see now is from 1988. We had one of the worst floods in a century. And so this is a woman wading through the waters. Interestingly, there's a little studio on the left called Greenland Photographers, and it was open for business. You could only, the water was waist deep, pretty much. So they did passport photographs, which you could still do in a wet studio. So the ingenuity and the resilience of the people, those are the things I wanted to talk about. And for me, what was very concerning was the fact that the images of Bangladesh did talk about floods, which is our reality, but we became the victims. We were not seen in terms of our resilience. And I was taking pictures of the democratic struggle. And this picture is, for me, one of the ways through which I thought this woman casting a vote was avenging Nur Hussein's death by bringing back democracy. And this is a story I was trying to tell, and no one was interested. Yet, when there was a flood, when there was a cyclone, we would get inundated by requests for pictures. This is taken afterwards. This is, we had an election. That's when I got the rude awakening that an election doesn't in itself lead to democracy. So our newly democratically elected prime minister was just as autocratic as the previous military ruler. And this is a picture taken at one of the university hostels where dissident students are being picked up and taken to jail. I didn't at that time realize that I myself was going to be in a similar prison van many years down the road. But that's how it began.
That's really, really useful to just sort of paint that picture of how you established a sort of different way, because it was quite a different way of seeing Bangladesh, and that's really important. Digital media has always been important. You, as Amanda mentioned, you brought email to Bangladesh, and so introducing that connectivity has been very much the forefront of your practice and your work with DRIC and Majority World. But you also value the printed photograph and that sort of physical encounter with photography. So that's sort of working locally and empowering, but also globally, and that sort of digital and physical. Can you talk us through a bit more about those sort of dual aspects of the dissemination of your work? Sure.
I'll just briefly talk about this picture. This was, I was commissioned to do an interview of Muhammad Nasheed, who was then the ex-president of the Maldives. So social justice has always been my space, but I was looking at things like this elsewhere. But to come back to your question, what we did basically was introduce email from a very practical point of view. We needed to counter this Western hegemony, the fact that largely white Western photographers were the people who told our story. But if you happen to be in Bangladesh and you need to reach an international audience, then you have to find some mechanism for doing so. And what we did was we set up this email network. It was a South-South network, and through which we were able to connect with photographers in Latin America, in Africa, in surrounding Asian countries, and that really led to Majority World, which we set up later on. But it was challenging those global inequalities, which also was part of the story. And for me, the technology was a means to the tool, and I would use, and I continue to use, any tool that works at any particular point. And introducing email led to what is now the digital revolution in Bangladesh. The later ISPs all began with that fledgling email network. And then later on, when maybe we just go back to that last picture, because it is, I'd like to refer to that. When we began working together with the NPEN on the theme of work, again, I decided to turn it around and did a story on people of leisure. And this work, which is about the British upper class, relates to that. We've always been studied and analyzed by Western historians, social scientists, whatever. I thought it would be interesting for a Bangladeshi to look at the white tribes of Britain. Luckily, I was allowed to do that. So this was work that I was very happy to do, and I was supported by Sunderland at that time. But let's go on to the next, which is more about intervention, because intervention isn't merely about technology, it's also about space and engagement. And one of the things that I continue to be concerned about is xenophobia. Islamophobia today is such an important issue. And again, Islam and people of Islamic origin are painted in a particular way. It's also true that I myself live in a country where there is a degree of conservatism, and photography is considered haram by a few people. My work had been shown in synagogues, in churches, in temples, but never in a mosque. And I thought that would be interesting to try and do. So there is this beautiful mosque called the Bait al-Rof in Dhaka, which was designed by a woman, Marina Tabassum. The land was donated by her grandmother. And it's a beautiful mosque which won the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. And not only did I want to photograph it, I wanted to show my work in the mosque itself, which was considered impossible to do in Bangladesh. To show a photographic exhibition in a mosque is, no one believed that could happen. So what I did was I met the mosque committee and told them that I wanted to take their mosque to the way the Prophet had intended it to be. So Muhammad's mosque in Medina had been much more than a place of prayer. It was an education center, a community center, a hospital. It sheltered women. He received state guests there. And once when a musical troupe from Abyssinia told him that they needed a place to perform, he said, perform in my mosque. So it was perhaps the first gallery or exhibition space. And I told the mosque people that this is how the Prophet had intended your mosque to be. So the idea really was both to challenge conservative Islam in terms of what Islam represents, but also to show the wider world how this religion has been portrayed in a very narrow sense. And this work currently is part of the show Truth to Power at the Asia Society in Houston. And we are hoping that through this work and other things, that's another intervention we will try and make. This is more personal work. I mean, for me, what was important was to question not only inequalities at a national level, but also at a personal level. My parents are very progressive, very educated, but in middle-class homes in Bangladesh, you often have home help. And this young boy, Mizan, used to work in my parents' house and clean. I stayed with my parents at that time. And he would clean the room where we watched television, but he would sit outside the room while my parents and us, we would sit inside to watch TV. The distance was tiny, but politically and socially, it was a huge chasm. One of the things we'd started doing at that time was to use the Greek calendar as a means of social messaging. The typical calendar was about pretty women, flowers, mosques, nature. We started bringing out social messages through our calendars, and I printed this picture in our calendar. I gave a copy to Mizan, I gave a copy to my mother. The following day, Mizan sat inside the room to watch TV with us. And for me, that was very significant. I mean, we talk about how we try to change things through photography, but we know in practice, there are many other forces, and our photographs are often far too weak to make significant impact. I mean, there are some pictures, of course, that have been iconic and have made an impact. But the fact that in my own home, to my mother, to Mizan, and to me, this photograph provided that shift was very, very significant. And it reassured me in terms of the medium that I was working with, the power that it had. So coming back to this, this relates to your early question about technology. Now, it's two pictures, as you can see. The one on the left is the tower being built. And the reason we built that tower was because when we started, we were accessing a satellite called Intelsat, which was directly above. It gave very good connectivity, but it was very expensive. There was a Mexican satellite, Aguila, which was much lower down, closer to the horizon, but we couldn't access it. And you see it on the right, there's that tree in front, and we certainly didn't want to chop down the tree. So we built this tower and put our satellite dish on top of the tower so we could peer over the tree and get the cheap satellite connectivity. So a lot of our work has been DIY, but this was the way we could make it happen. I mean, otherwise, this technology would have been too expensive for us. This relates to 1884, when Africa was carved up again, the relationship with colonialism, and that continues to be some of the things we talk about. So our work is not simply about photography, but also about reclaiming that space that has been lost because of not only colonialism, but the new forces today of imperialism and aggression that happens. And what has happened to Africa in recent times is so grotesque. While there is all this talk of freedom and democracy, the fact that nations are being ruined simply because of Western interest and arms trades and things like that is something which bothers me hugely. And for me, at the end of the day, if through photography we have not been able to make an intervention into those core issues, we've not really done anything. And pretty pictures has never been my thing. That brings us to this picture, which is a more recent work. One of the things we've also begun to do is to look at our own history, the history of muslin, this incredible fabric that was grown in Bangladesh and went across the world. But this is taken in Powis Castle of Robert Clive's residence, and how the British East India Company used the muslin trade for its wealth, and how later, in order to strengthen the Lancashire mills, the textile industry in India was completely demolished. It's part of a story we're doing. We brought out a book, we did an exhibition, we did a film, even a fashion show, which has been part of this. But let's move on to the next one. I think because maybe you have a question to go with this, because this relates to something we discussed earlier.
Yes. So my third question is around this shift that you made some time ago, a sort of conscious shift in your visual approach. So you've talked quite a lot about the the value and the reasons you got into sort of documentary practice. But there was a shift in your work to a more kind of metaphorical approach and less that sort of direct representation. So I wondered if you could talk a bit about why you made those changes.
Yeah, two shifts really. One had to do with my first show, which was at the German Cultural Center, and I invited all my corporate clients. I also invited all my subaltern friends, the janitors, the caretakers, the guards, and whatever. And I asked them if they'd gone to see the show. No one had. And I was a little bit upset. But then they said, would they have let us in? And that was a very important question for me because, I realized that while theoretically these are spaces that are open to everyone, socially and culturally, these white cube spaces are very elitist. And for the subaltern, it's not a space that's welcoming. So we recognize that, okay, if people will not go to the gallery, we must take the gallery to the people. And that was when we started doing shows like this. These are in boats that go to villages. We've done shows in rickshaw vans. We have the festival, Chobimala, which is a very high quality festival, but we do have the component that goes to school playing fields, villages, whatever. We've done shows in bullock carts, in tuk-tuks, on camels in different countries. So that became part of it. But also, this, maybe we'll come to this later. I'll just finish the question that we had. So in terms of the practice, or maybe I'll come to this and I'll come to your question later when the pictures come. This is a very important picture. Again, this was while I was in jail, the prisoners took very good care of me. And I was in the jail hospital and they came up to me and said, we want one of your pictures. And I managed to smuggle in one of my books, which had a picture of a red sailboat, which is quite well known. It's been published in National Geographic and many other places. But when I came out of hospital, the prisoners had painted this 12-foot mural of my photograph here. And it's still there in jail. And we have this, and I'm now trying to put together, my most recent work is about a film I'm trying to do on the artwork produced by prisoners in jail. That's something that I had been involved with while I was there. So that was quite important. But to come back to your other question, this was also part of the intervention. This was at Chobimala, where in the last Chobimala, not the one that just went, the one before that, that took place immediately after I'd come out of jail. And we'd made a very brave decision at that time to go ahead with the festival, not even knowing if I would come out. So we invited Arundhati Roy to come over and speak. But the show, we booked a 1,000-seater gallery because she's a big name and everything. And the government withdrew permission the day before the event. But we managed to find a way through my jail contacts, actually. We managed to find another venue and we continued with that. But that sort of intervention is something we've done. But to go back to your question, and maybe while I'm talking, I'll also talk to this. This is actually a link with Tyneside, if you like. There's Steve Conlon there. This was a workshop that we did very early on. We were doing workshops in documentary photography, but we wanted to do the work, show the work to the people the story was about. So we worked on a community in Savar, just outside of Dhaka, and we took the show to and set it up under a banyan tree in the village. And this is the first time these people have ever seen a photographic exhibition. So those were the type of interventions. But I'll come back and to what you mentioned earlier, Arabella, because one of the things that happened as I was doing this was I began to see how your image can be controlled by others. It's not always in your hands. I had a show banned because it was critical of the military general. But when we did finally show the work, through great difficulty, it was reviewed in a magazine that was owned by the minister I was critiquing. And I was intrigued by this. But what happened was this review said wonderful things about my work, about the artistry of my work and everything else, completely devoid of the political content. And I decided then that I would ensure that my work could not be separated from the politics. So I took on a very different approach to photography. Up till that point, I'd been working along the classical lines of documentary photography. This is also, some of these pictures are mixed, it doesn't matter. This is related to that. It's part of the Crossfire show, which was on extrajudicial killings, and the work was much more conceptual. It required people to work out why the pictures were significant. There was very little data given. It was shown originally in a gallery, and it's been shown in museums, but that treatment allowed that work to enter museums and gallery fine art spaces, which the conventional documentary work would find difficult to get to. But we also did a version, which, as in the last picture, and here we have it in Salimala, where it was given as laminated prints, which people could take away, put on walls, and make up their own shows. So this DIY version, while also occupying the white cube space, was something we were constantly doing, ensuring that we would not be crowded out of these spaces. So rather than reject those spaces, we decided we would intervene and make sure that our work was pervasive. So this was something to do with the international media. In New York Times had contacted us during the cyclone because they wanted us to do a feature. You know, the cyclone is what's exciting for Western media. And we said, yes, we have those pictures, but we don't think that's the story. To be fair, the New York Times said, okay, tell us what the story is. And we did an entire story on people rebuilding their lives, and fishermen repairing their boats, and farmers replanting their seeds, people rallying around one another. The girl at the top was an orphan, but she was taken over and found a home in another family that was just as destitute. So these were stories of resurgence, of resilience, of people's character and tenacity. So through that, we were trying to change the narrative, if you like. But I was still looking at the other ways in which stories could be told. So here, this linear narrative moved. This is the Crossfire work I was telling you about. And the idea really was that these were people who were killed generally in the middle of the night, extrajudicial killing by the state. And I felt that showing bodies would not really achieve very much. So the idea was to try and imagine what the dying people might have seen in the last moments of their lives. So all the pictures were taken at the time of death. They were lit by torchlight, because when I spoke to the family members, they talked of how their first encounter with the Rapid Action Battalion who were doing the killing was the torches that they shone on their faces. So every picture is lit by torchlight. But there's no data given along with the picture. And you have to work out. There's a Google Earth map which has a case study, and then you go there, you find out that there was a body here. But the villagers were talking about how the paddy field was pristine. So had there been a skirmish, which was the official version, the paddy field would have been disturbed. And then you find out that the body has multiple bullet holes, but the shirt the body's wearing has a single bullet hole. And slowly the story begins to unfold. And this has become one of the most successful shows that we've ever had. And it did, at that point, bring down the incidence of extrajudicial killing. Sadly, later they've gone on to disappearances. So we have to come up with different strategies again. Let's move on, Amanda. So this is part of a later story that we did, Kalpana's Warriors. I mentioned extrajudicial killing, but Kalpana Chakma was a hill woman was the leader of the Hill Women's Federation. These are the indigenous people in the Chittagong Hill Tracts who are currently under military occupation. And this is a story that's not being told. So what I did was I did a series of 3 shows where I looked at what was missing. So because the eyewitness accounts of the Paharis was not regarded, I decided to photograph objects. Can we have the video here, Arabella, Amanda, please? So I did a pseudo-forensic study of what were effectively silent witnesses. So this is the bark of a tree that Kalpana would have leaned upon, which I photographed using very high magnification at the Brain Institute in Brisbane. But what you're seeing actually is 27 still images taken at different focal lengths. So it appears as if the bark is breathing. The idea was that these were silent witnesses that I was asking, and what we did in the show was to project it onto a low-level plinth, and we had sounds of the forest. And as you peer down into it, you get a sense of something living. And these were the ways in which we did it. The next, let's go on to the next one. The other picture is of one of the shoes of Kalpana, which with the mud had collected, and this was part of her personal belongings. So I was trying to give some sort of an identity, humanize this person who had disappeared. And let's move on to the next one. In this one, I actually used a very different technique, because when I visited the home, I discovered that they had almost no furniture, just these straw mats. And I decided I would use the straw mats as my canvas to make a point that here are people who have materially so little, yet that the state fears them sufficiently to disappear them. But when I spoke to her brother, he talked of how in the last altercation she had with her abductor, it was about the fact that the military had burned their villages. So I decided to use fire to produce the imagery. And there I took a laser device from the garment industry and developed an algorithm to adapt it so that it could char my 16-bit images into these straw mats. And this is at the Asia Society in Houston right now. This is a show that's happening. In Bangladesh, we could use candles. Sadly, US law doesn't allow us to use a naked flame. So it's a synthetic flame, if you like. But these are ways through which I've tried to tell a story where A, the conventional mechanism I felt would not be as effective, and B, where the politics of the story was so embedded within the artwork itself, you couldn't separate them. This is intervention of a different sort. In 1994, actually in 1992, we started training women photographers because I recognized how male this medium is. I also recognized that it was very middle class and upper middle class. So in 94, I started teaching working class children to do photography. And several of them are my colleagues now, and they've all become successful professionals. Let's go to the next one. So the next picture, this is Brishti Hamidah, and she was a 10-year-old when we started. Once COVID is over, she hopes to go to Britain to do her PhD in law. So these are the transformations, but the picture on the right is of working class children work in homes. And these are the stories that these kids were talking about because they had a different story to tell. So the intervention was at a technical level, but also at a social level. Maybe I should talk to this. This could have come earlier, but not to worry. This is a show that we did after Ershad fell. And as you can see from the images, they're on tatty prints on cardboard. It's done on a zero budget. But the show was phenomenally successful. And in 3.5 days, we had some 400,000 people come to see the show. There were queues over a mile long. We had near riots. And these are photographers trying to stop people from charging into the show. That's the sort of response. And it was a huge feeling that photography can be so powerful and people can be so hungry to see their own stories. So it was hugely reassuring. Yeah, let's move on. This is more recent. Unless you want to come in, I can continue, Arabella.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, we haven't got a lot more time, Shahidul, but it would be really useful for us to hear about the work you've done with the Rohingya and maybe bring us up to date again with the laws in Bangladesh and the digital security law. But we've literally got about 5 more minutes.
Okay, we'll go through this. So this was the situation that led to my arrest, actually, the student protests. This is very contemporary. This is 2018. Let's move on. This is about the Rohingya situation. Everyone thinks it's happening now, but it's a story that goes back many, many years. This was in 1992 in the early Rohingya camps where a girl is trying to collect drinking water. And let's move on. These are Rohingya refugees. I traveled by boat with them. And later, you have the little kid in the green shirt. The mother got very tired, and later I was carrying that kid afterwards. But yes, let's move on. And this is when they actually landed in Dhaka, and then we found a way to take them across. Let's move on. This is that kid. It's actually taken by Shahnawaz Khan, who was my fixer at that time. I was very much part of the group joining their exodus. But let's go on to the very last picture, and I think I will end with that. This is what's happening now. The Digital Security Act is draconian law. I was not arrested under it because there was an ICT Act, and I was arrested under 57B. At that time, we were very upset about this law, and the government said they'd reform it. What they did was they put in an even more sinister law, the Digital Security Act. And under that, huge number of largely journalists, but journalists, writers, artists, dissidents have all been picked up. And this is a protest taking place in Shahbag, which is our equivalent of Tahrir Square, where artists are protesting against the loss of the fact that we can no longer speak, the fact that there is no freedom of expression, and that the media, to a large extent, with important exceptions, have largely become part of the propaganda machinery of the government. While technically we have democracy, of course, we never got a chance to vote, so this is not an elected government. But more importantly, the fact that today, the voices that we would normally have had, which traditionally artists in Bangladesh have been very vocal, today the leading artists are all silent. We had the death of writer Mushtaq in jail. Kishore, the cartoonist, was tortured. He's just been released on bail, not released. But this is happening. And for me, it's horrific that while this is happening, there are Western governments that are still conducting business as usual. And there are those who laud our Prime Minister for being an inspirational model and providing security, which is a slap on our faces. I think I'll end with that.
Wow. Thank you so much. I think that's a very brisk going through, but what a powerful way to end, Shahidul. Thank you so much. We do have a few minutes left to answer some questions. So if anyone has any questions, Amanda, I think you can either put them in the text. Amanda, I think you're picking some of those up, aren't you, for us?
I am, yes. I don't think there's any through the chat. There's a comment to say it was too short. Can we have a longer one sometimes? Which I'm sure, I feel now we think that everything's sort of infinitely more possible. Now we're all in this sort of Zoom world. So I'm sure we'd definitely like to do more of these. I'm just looking for any raised hands. But before we do that, I think Carol had a question. Is she?
Yeah, if I can manage to unmute myself and even put my camera on. So Shahidul, that was brilliant as ever. So thank you so much, and thank you so much for taking time out. I think you're currently in Cairo, which is just extraordinary. Extraordinary for us to imagine as well, given we're all locked down. Shahidul, I had a question which is really in relation to some of your final comments there about the current situation in Bangladesh. But I wondered if you could reflect a little bit about the way in which while you were incarcerated, while you were in prison, there was a huge, as Amanda said at the beginning, a really important global campaign, part of which included a sort of mass photographic exhibition prompted by your work and prompted by the many stories that you've been telling over the years. I wonder, in relation to that, I wonder, do you think that there are other ways in which we should be working collectively with one amplified voice to raise awareness of some of of so many of the issues that you are concerned with?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a question that has been asked in the sense that before I was arrested, Professor Yunus, who's the government went after, our Nobel laureate, the most well-known Bangladeshi globally, put the leader of opposition in jail. The Supreme Court, the Chief Justice was sent on exile. Here's a pesky journalist. They thought, yeah, this is not a problem. And suddenly, the entire world exploded, and they just didn't know how to deal with that. And I think that is part of what we have to do. We do need to build that coalition, that solidarity, and we need to be working together. And this was a very good example that even the most repressive of regimes cannot withstand that sort of people pressure. Whoops, someone else is calling. I'm just going to tell them off. Sorry about that. I had another one scheduled immediately. You can see how this thing works. No, but to come back to that situation, I think we need to develop alternative strategies. We live in a time where governments speak about democracy and freedom in their rhetoric and actively oppose them in their practice. That happens in your country with Julian Assange. It happens in my country with me and various other places. And we need to find ways to combat it. And I think these are global struggles that we need to fight. And we will only do it if we have that collective strength. And I think nurturing that strength, developing those strategies, and developing the camaraderie that is so essential to our craft has to be the way forward.
Yeah. We've got a related question from Simone, which I think you've kind of partially answered. Would you like to ask that, Simone?
Right, can you hear me?
Yeah.
My internet is really wobbly, so I was wondering, is there, well, you partially answered it, I guess, in terms of that we have to globally stick together and show solidarity, but do you think there is an interest in Bangladesh and from your and the photography community to see more images from the UK in terms of our struggle here for democracy? Because I'm involved and have seen a lot of movement in terms of resistance and getting the Tories out by all means, and there are some interesting concepts, and I'm obviously interested in documenting various things, and we've already had the start with the police bill last weekend. So
absolutely, I mean, the Black Lives Matter movement is crucial to all of us. What you're doing, out there. I mean, I'm here in Cairo where people are talking about, there was that huge euphoria during Tahrir Square, and it's completely dissipated, and we've gone back in some ways. My niece, Sophia, who was very central to the Free Shahidul campaign, is involved in something called Turbine Bug. This is what's happening in India right now. And the level of repression in India is staggering. Yet, because India is the darling of the West in so many ways, it's a story that doesn't always come up. Luckily, they were able to do something at Tate Modern, and that work has been shortlisted in the V&A for the Jameel Award. So around that, there will be some interest. But absolutely, we would be very interested in what you're doing, and I think you should be showing what we are doing. And as far as the government's concerned, they follow their own agenda, and really for them, a blind dictator is easier to deal with than a messy democracy. We're the ones who need to build a coalition and not let them decide.
Got a question from Mike Collier.
Hi, firstly, thank you so much for that. That was brilliant work and really inspiring talk. Just in relation to Carol's question, I just wondered, maybe this is an impossible question to answer, but do you think it's more important to influence people? Because I love the way you took your work, to the people, particularly recognizing that they might not even find access to the white cube part of their culture. Or do you think it's more important to influence governments? Which do you think you might have the best, what might make change happen better?
I'll use Malcolm X's analogy of any means necessary.
Yeah.
And I actually work at all levels. I ensure that my work goes to museums, is talked about, is in academic circles. I also continue to work at a grassroots level. One of the reasons I do that is because while the grassroots level is important, you also need to be on the head table and your voice needs to be heard. And my experience has been that you can be shouting away outside those fortresses and they will simply wall themselves off and not listen. So it's intervening at every level and making sure that you're also part of the bridging structures. I'm not fighting a battle, I'm fighting a war. And there are times when I will make tactical retreats, but I intend to win. And in order to do that, I think we need to be strategic as well as tactical. And there are times when you will have to make alliances which are not conventional, but have to happen. And I think it's also true that you need to understand your opponent and read your opponent. One of the things where we made a mistake is because we identify ourselves as being very different from our opponents, we disengage. I don't think that's the right strategy. I think you need to understand your opponent as well as they do if you want to be effective at countering them.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got to say I completely agree with all of that. Thanks.
Got a few more questions, hopefully time for a few more. A question from Karen.
Thank you. Hi, thanks for that, and really great. Really love your honesty and how you've opened up to us. I was really struck by, even in your first few images, how central women are in your work. You know, you put them literally right in the middle of some of your frames, and they feature a lot. And as you talked about the importance of, you know, getting women's messages across as well. And I just wondered, where did that come from? Have you had strong women in your life, or is it just about injustice and trying to address that?
Well, firstly, I consider myself to be a feminist, and I think any conscious person should be a feminist. I think any conscious person should be a human rights activist. These are not things that should be closeted as such. If things were the opposite, I would have argued for men in the same way. So it's not my gender, but the fact that there is an inequality that relates to it. But yes, your question is very pertinent. I mean, my mother is a terrier, was a terrier, sadly she passed away. She, when she, after partition, they had to flee India, they came to Bangladesh. She was an educated woman. She wanted to set up a school for girls. No one was interested. She bought a tent, pitched it in the playground, and with 14 kids set up a school which went on to become the best known school and college for women in the country. My partner, Rehnuma, is a firebrand. And I'm very lucky in that sense that I have not only a very dear friend, but also a very hard critic living with me, constantly pointing out that every time I stray, I'm told, you know, what you do is not, you know, you're not walking the walk. And I'm very fortunate in that sense. Yeah, I've had very powerful women around me, but also these very powerful women have been extremely supportive, extremely generous. And certainly when I was in jail, they are the ones who got me out, you know, and in a sense, they're the ones who had to deal with the legal issues, the medical issues, the security issues, the financial issues. And I would not be here talking to you now had they not been around.
Thank you.
I'm aware Harry's had a virtual hand up for a while and I hadn't spotted it. So we'll have your question, Harry, and then I think we've got two more in the chat and then we'll see how we are for time, but I think we may have to wrap up then. Harry. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Got one mute. Shahidul, it's lovely to see you again. One of the things I find is interesting is that the traditional position that photography had was through its influence through print media. And of course, as we appreciate, print medium is declining. Its power and its reach have declined. Where do you think the future of still imagery lies, right, in being able to continue to get the message that we want to tell to the world out there? Because uniquely, photography has that reflective capability, which is unlike the video image.
It continues to be such a powerful medium, but you know, I took on photography when I did because I recognized the power. Had I been starting today, I would still have done photography because it continues to be powerful, but I would probably have given equal importance to social media because I recognize that that is the delivery mechanism through which those images go out. It's a changing space. I don't know what the new spaces will be. At the moment, we just finished our festival. The picture that you see behind me is part of a virtual gallery of our festival. So we had this festival this time and we couldn't get any international guests. So we did a virtual show, which is out there and people get a chance to see, which is made up, I mean, it is, you can navigate through it, but it is made up of still images. AI provides new opportunities altogether. But I think what we also need to look at is artificial intelligence in terms of how tagging images, the metadata with images. And one of the things we did in our show this time is we had a lot more data to go with the images than we would conventionally have had in a normal exhibit. The print was there, but not many people could visit it. But along with that was a QR code. And with that, you could look at the video, you could get much deeper into the story, and it opened up new vistas. I think that is the world that we're coming to. And the still photograph will probably be a window and not the end in itself. Where it will lead to, I don't know. But I think we need to walk that path.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
We've got a question from Mariam. Do you want to unmute, Mariam?
Hi. Well, welcome to Cairo, first of all. I'm based in Cairo as well.
It's
You
so
should
good
come to
to
my
see.
talk on Saturday.
Oh, I would love that. Just I don't know where it is, but yeah, that sounds pretty
It's the
awesome.
Cairo Photo Week.
Oh yeah, I don't know the locations of the
Well,
booth.
perhaps Amanda, you can link us up, and I'll send you the detail.
Awesome. So my question is, I work in human rights as well. I try my best to work in cultural stories and stuff like that. And seeing that you've been working with such stories as well and being in high risk areas, things can get a little disheartening, if that's the right word. How do you stay motivated to do this kind of work and to just keep going, even though, you know, bad things just keep on happening all the time, especially to people who try to speak truth to power, like the stock is?
Well, today I met the photographer. What's his name? Sanwak?
Shao Kahn?
Yeah. And you know, he came out of jail to meet us, and then he's going to go back to jail. I mean, that's the reality that we're in. But I look at it differently, in the sense that you know, I got into photography because I felt I wanted to do something with my life, and we must all, at the end of the day, feel our life is worthwhile. If all we've done is, you know, after being born, we grow up, we have a career, we have a mortgage, we have a house, we have a few kids, and we die, that's not much of a living. I want my life, I want my footprint in some way to have made a difference to this planet. So I look at it differently. I think I'm hugely privileged to be able to participate in a capacity where my life makes a difference to others. And to me, that's a very fulfilling living. Sure, it gets difficult. You know, I've been jailed, I've been tortured, I've been knifed, all those sort of things. They're not nice, I'm not recommending them, but I would not choose another life for a minute, because at the end of the day, I do feel that my life matters to me, to the people around me, and that when I go, and at some stage I will, I feel that I will have done as much as I possibly could to leave a better world. What more can you hope for?
It's very inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you. I think unless I don't think I've missed anyone, so apologies if I have in the chat or hands, but I can't see any virtual hands up. So I think the final question is from Nayanika. If you'd like to unmute.
Yeah. Hi, Shahidul. It's lovely to have you, as I said, virtually in the Northeast, at least. Shahidul is an old friend, and Renuma is an old friend. And I actually flew in to Dhaka the night after Shahidul was arrested on 5th of August, right? Was it, Shahidul?
Yes.
5th of August, yes, 2018. I was just reading something by Arjuna Padurai today, who's talking about the role of tyranny by example, right? And you were one of those tyranny by examples for the state, because it was an attempt to tell everyone, shut up or else, right? You became this exemplar for the state. And I'm just thinking of what you were talking about, tactics. So at one level, we realize when states exhibit such kind of seemingly stupid power and you know, make a mockery of themselves, they are actually defacing themselves, what they are arguing against. So in even talking about tactics and strategies, and so that shows their vulnerability. States show their vulnerability through their tyranny, right, in some ways. Otherwise, they wouldn't be trying to create that fear. So what I was thinking is, in terms of even strategies and tactics, one of the things that struck me, even when I was in Dhaka at that point of time, we were writing to the Parliamentary Commission here in UK to say, oh, you know, this shouldn't be done. But I felt this kind of disquiet about doing it, because in some ways we were like, we don't want the savior paradigm of the West, right? But also we need to turn back to, as you were saying, the alliances we need to make. So also we turn back to all the resources we have to talk back against tyranny. So how do you feel how we should go about the strategies of taking recourse from the West, or the resources of the, while we all are located within it. I teach in Durham University, so I'm very much in the West. So what are the kind of negotiations one makes? And that's a kind of interesting position and paradoxical sometimes. So how do you deal with the paradoxical positions? And that's an advice for myself.
Well, I would question the savior position, because I think the people you're saving, I mean, sure, in your case, the direct connection with me is very material and emotional. But I think the people you need to save are yourselves, because you operate within a system which does not believe in the rhetoric that it gives out. So I'll give you an example. I mean, Scotland, Baroness Scotland, who recently gave out this statement about Hasina being this inspiring role model and whatever. I mean, that is, of course, a slap on our faces who are on the ground. But at the end of the day, it's your government making a statement that you need to deal with. We don't need to live with her. We need to live with the repercussions of what she says, because Hasina can then say, oh, they have said nice things about me. But it is your government saying it. And for me, the problem is that in this process, they are collaborators. The security equipment that we get is obtained from the West. The arms that we purchase are obtained from the West. MI5 or MI6, I'm not sure which one, have been involved in training Rapid Action Battalion. And these are things that are happening because of resources that are being made by your government. And I think, sure, at the moment that's happening to us, but that scorpion has a tail. And I think unless you're able to prevent your tyranny by your leaders, that tyranny will turn onto yourself. And we are in this global war. And there are people who talk about how regime change needs to take place, and the things that have happened in the name of regime change is horrendous. But I don't actually think it is regime change we're talking about. I think it is the process that has to change, because I think as long as this becomes the way through which leaders come into power, anyone who comes into that position would be as much a tyrant in that position. So unless people are sufficiently empowered to create that accountability, we will be landing ourselves with leaders we do not deserve. And if these are leaders we do not deserve, it is up to us to ensure that they do not become our leaders.
Great answer. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I don't think there's any further questions, so I think we should draw this afternoon to a close. You've certainly given us lots to think about, Shahidul, and I think, within the photographic community here, we can be thinking about collaborations, as we talked about, that kind of harnessing of that collective, that collective action. So let's keep talking about that, and certainly we can think about, there's lots to think about in terms of our own governments and the actions of it at the moment. So yeah, fascinating discussion as ever. Thank you. Thanks you all for your questions and comments. And thank you to Arabella for chairing this afternoon. And I'd also like to thank Suli for interpretation, and Michael Daglish for technical support. I can't see him on the screen, but thank you, Michael. So thanks everyone for coming. Oh, before I forget, I'm just experimenting with polls, so I'm going to put a short poll up on the screen. But thank you. If you could complete this, that'll be brilliant. Next time it may be more detailed.
Okay, well, thank you again. Bye for now. Take care.
Thanks, Shahidul.
Thank you, Shahidul.
Thank you very much.
So much.
Bye-bye.